I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare in-the-trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm joined by Nick Kazan, who's written the screenplays for At Close Range, Fallen, Enough, and Reversal of Fortune, for which he earned an Oscar nomination. He also wrote and directed the 1994 thriller Dream Lover and adapted the Roald Dahl novel Matilda with his screenwriter wife, Robin Swicord. Nick, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Mike.
Now, how did you get your start in screenwriting?
Well, I got my start. I don't even know how to answer that. I'll tell you the thing which made me a writer. I dropped out of college for 2 years. Prior to dropping out, I wrote a play. The play was done in college. While I was out of college, I wrote a lot of short stories. My mother had been a failed writer. I felt that I might want to be a writer. When I was back in college as a senior, I went back to avoid going to jail or going to Vietnam. I went to see a short play by Harold Pinter. I came home the next day and I heard a line of dialogue in my head and I went and wrote it down. And I got up an hour and a half later and I went in the other room. My wife was there and she said, "What were you typing?" And I said, "I just wrote a play, but I can't tell you what it was about. I have no idea what I just wrote." And then I rested and I had a cup of coffee and I went back in and I rewrote it. But prior to returning to the room, I had no idea what it was.
Like an out-of-body writing experience.
Out-of-body writing experience. It was truly like what, you know, the Greeks and others would talk about in terms of a muse. It was like I'd been visited. Well, that experience made me a writer. I felt I was called. I felt I was claimed. I didn't know, you know, how I would do it, but I felt I had to do it.
You didn't know where it was going to lead?
And this play was done in college, and then it was done professionally at the Magic Theater, which was then in Berkeley and later moved to San Francisco, and they did all Shepard's plays and so forth. So I went on writing plays. Eventually, I moved to Los Angeles, and I was writing movie scripts as well, some with friends. I wrote a great many of them, 10, 15, 20, I don't know how many I wrote before I had any success. And then one day, I read an article by Michael Goodwin in the Village Voice about Texas chainsaw massacres. Well, I grew up in New York City. I went to a high-toned college. So I have, you know, I can be a little bit of a snob. Texas Chainsaw Massacres is not a film I normally would have gone to see. But I read this article in which he talked about how film functions like dream, and about how this movie was very scary and very funny, the way dreams are. And I had to go out and see the movie. I went and saw the movie, and I came home, and I had an idea. And in 4 or 5 days, I wrote a script which had the same feeling, same ethos as Texas Chainsaw Massacres. Well, I finished the script, and I put it in, and I read it over, and I thought, this is horrifying, and I put it in my drawer. And I went about working on other things, and about a month later, I said, you know, I should take a look at that script. Maybe it wasn't quite as terrible as I thought. And it was a script that had very little dialogue in it. It was mostly visual, and what dialogue it had was sort of peculiar, Pinteresque in a way, but also Chainsaw Massacre-esque in a way. And
it's an unholy alliance. I bet it was excellent.
Well, I took it out and read it, and I thought, this is pretty good. And I gave it to my agent, who represented one of the top horror directors in town, and he didn't like it. I gave it to my friends, and they said, you know, this is a lot better than your other scripts. And I said, yeah, I know. And I changed agents, found another agent, and I sold that script. And that's how I became a screenwriter, really, is that I had two experiences which formed me. One as a playwright, and the second as a screenwriter. And in both cases, there was a kind of automatic writing quality to them.
What's the name of the first script?
My script was called Animals. It was turned into a film that I took my name off of.
Well, apart from that experience where it clicked creatively for you, was there a later point where it really clicked business-wise for you? And you know, was there one screenplay that kind of broke through the ceiling for you?
Well, after I wrote that screenplay, I got to work on Francis, which was a wonderful experience. But the script that really changed my status in Hollywood was At Close Range. That script did me an enormous amount of good initially as people read it and it circulated. And it was written more or less in the same style as the first script that I mentioned. But it was not until that script was produced that things really changed, because until your script is produced, you're like a virgin, you know. It's like, you're a pretty girl, but you know, you don't put out. But once they know that the film is worth making, that somebody else has invested the money in it, that really changes things.
What do you think prepared you most to be a screenwriter?
Just going to movies. I just love movies. I mean, I never studied writing. I never studied screenwriting. I didn't go to film school.
Do you beat out a story in advance of writing it, or do you still hear that voice and just kind of, rush through it?
Things really vary. I can spend as little as a few days or as much as 6 months preparing to write a script. When I actually write the script, I like to do it quickly, because I feel that the energy of doing it quickly is transmitted to the reader. The reader feels that, and the reader is carried along by the speed of it. I have learned through making mistakes over and over again that if I reach a point where a tiny bell goes off, that I might be going in the wrong direction, to stop. It's very painful to stop, but if you don't stop, then you're going to reach the end, that you're going to hear that bell a little louder, you're going to realize that you have a very substantial problem, and then you're going to have to amputate a limb. And in my experience, it's like, people talking about amputees. You always, if somebody had a third arm and you cut it off, they're always going to feel the third arm. If you have a real problem and you build it into the fabric of your piece, people are going to sense it.
How do you approach writing things that you don't have any first-hand experience with such kind of authenticity? Do you do a lot of research?
Well, in some cases, in Reversal of Fortune, I read thousands of pages of trial transcripts, and I discovered things about the case that no one else knew, essentially. Human things that other people, that lawyers wouldn't have paid any attention to. On At Close Range, I went and I hung out with some members of the gang that Chris Walken's character, that the real guy, people who were in his gang.
So that was useful to pick up the dialogue and kind of the cadence of the speech.
Exactly, the cadence of the speech. You go to see a movie and you're with the movie and it's exciting and you're following it, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, I just left the movie. One of the reasons that I will spend as long as 6 months preparing to write a script is because I don't want to fake it.
And is that 6 months spent doing a formal outline, or can it take different forms?
I'll come back to that in a sec. It's like, and if I have an original idea, I can have the genesis of the idea, I can know the end, but if I don't know quite how to get there, I want to feel that I have all the necessary steps in place before I start, so that I don't do anything that's phony, because you get thrown out of a movie so easily.
And you always know where it's going.
You always know where it's going. In terms of my process, I don't use cards. I begin, when I write notes, when I prepare to write a script, I'm writing dialogue. Some of it I'm just hearing. Sometimes I don't know who's talking yet, so it's analogous to that original experience that I had. I've written, 5-page scenes preparing to write a script, and I don't know who's saying the words yet. And so often that stuff gets thrown out, but sometimes it goes in the movie word for word. It's part of the process, of course, is character analysis, developing characters, and part of it is writing outlines. And I will write an outline, 10 days into starting to think about a script, and then I'll get 30 pages into the script, and then I won't know what happens next, and I'll just stop. And then a month later or 2 weeks later, I'll start a new outline. And I won't look at the other outline, and I'll go as far as I can go. There comes a point when I reach critical mass where I have to write the script, and I just can't. And I try to frustrate myself as much as I can, so that when I do write the script, the energy that I've built up is really intense.